Picture this. You are 16 years old, standing in front of 400 people that you cannot see. You know that some of them are strangers, but many of them are people that you interact with regularly. You are sweaty and out of breath and have just finished putting into words some of the ugliest, scariest, most embarrassing thoughts that have ever crossed your mind. Your makeup is running because tears are streaming down your cheeks, and you can only pray that your words are being met with compassion. Now, I recognize many of you, this situation sounds like an absolute nightmare. But for me, it was one of the most formative moments of my high school career. I'll explain. If you couldn't tell from my excellent posture and breath support, I'm a theater kid to my core. Home videos prove that I've been making theater for longer than I can remember. For much of my life, my focus was on developing skills that would set me apart at auditions, planting my feet, gesturing with purpose, and learning to down-inflect at the end of a sentence. I got my start in after-school programs doing truncated versions of classic Broadway musicals, but by the time I hit high school, my horizons were beginning to expand. Being on stage was no longer about simply providing myself with an outlet for my creativity. It became an opportunity to consciously investigate myself and the world around me. This new perspective on solidified with a show called Girlhood. The production featured 18 young women sharing real stories from our lives and was created over the course of 8 weeks through sharing stories and building communal rituals in our high school auditorium. It was during this show that I stood on stage, messy and breathless, my soul bare before my community. I bring up my experience with this show because it epitomizes the broader life skills that participating in the arts have given me. My time in theater has taught me to think both critically and empathetically, to communicate and collaborate effectively, and to hold myself accountable for the well-being of a larger community. It has taught me to find strength in my vulnerability and to face myself and the world around me with tenacity, compassion, and humor. I am who I am today because of these experiences. Which is why, 4 years after Girlhood closed, I decided to embark on an independent research project that would hopefully illuminate this medium that has so fundamentally shaped me as a person. I entitled the project, "The Psychological Benefits of Theater Education for Adolescents." It was meant to explore the existing scientific research on the power of theater-based practices to promote growth and wellness among young people. Ideally, it would also serve as a tool to convince educators and administrators that theater programs like the one that produced Girlhood are worth funding. I came into this process with prop guns blazing, ready to see my lived experiences cleanly reflected in the literature. Unfortunately, I was in for a bit of a surprise. You see, while the formalized psychological study of applied theater, that is, theater whose purpose is not purely aesthetic, has been around for about 70 years, the bulk of research in this field has really been done in the past 2 decades. And from an arts advocate's perspective, it's a bit of a mixed bag. On the one hand, many individual studies feature promising results concerning applied theater's ability to promote empathy, creativity, and a strong sense of self in young people. On the other hand, the overall field is struggling to solidify its theories and best practices. This is common among nascent areas of scientific inquiry, but I couldn't help but feel bemused by these lackluster findings. Because here's the thing. Theater has existed on this earth in some form or another for over 2,000 years. It has been successfully leveraged for everything, from communal healing to religious rituals to political propaganda. The urge to share and embody stories feels so innately human that it has popped up in culture after culture, century after century, the entire world over. How, I wondered, was this widespread convergent validity not enough to demonstrate that there is clearly some powerful psychological mechanism at play within this medium? The answer to this conundrum occurred to me while reading a paper by social psychologist James Pennebaker. In the article, Pennebaker offers the following wisdom. Theories are grand, but never take them too seriously. Their importance is in guiding research. If your data do not support your theory, trust your data more than your theory. This felt like very sound advice upon my initial reading, but I was subsequently struck by the larger issue that this statement seems to gloss over. What information is constituting our data? Now, most research methods classes will answer this question by pointing you towards coding schemas and other methods that are meant to sanitize and standardize the information that researchers get from subjects. And while these methods do offer an effective means of quantifying and replicating data, they also create a level of human intervention that can risk causing researchers to miss the point of their study entirely. This is purely academic, but the societal implications are significant. The way researchers choose to measure the value of a program can have a direct impact on whether or not it receives funding. Dr. Rena Fraden addresses this tension in her book, Imagining Medea, which explores a theater-based social work program for incarcerated women in San Francisco. In her introduction, Fraden laments, "What I think people find is that the usual standards they rely on for judging do not accurately reflect the effects of this project. Critics ask whether what an audience sees is or is it. Guards ask whether prisoners are more dissatisfied or more confident. Funders want to know the number of lives that have been saved, or the percentage who return to jail." Now, from a pragmatic standpoint, we can understand these stakeholders' questions. The answers are essential if we are to determine whether or not programs like these are worth the money and effort required to keep them running. And for decisions like this, quantitative data is a clearer means of comparison across programs and creates a more tangible connection between the costs and benefits of a given venture. But, as Fraden explains, none of these questions yields a description that accounts for the interaction and intermingling of art and social work. It is precisely the ways in which this project collapses such distinctions that marks its vitality and seems attention to. Now, I can accept that in the current American nonprofit model, accountability towards stakeholders is essential. But what concerns me, both from an applied and theoretical standpoint, is when these force artists and activists to filter their work through a medium that may not be able to render its benefits properly. The reality is are not doing justice to the subjects we are studying. The time has come to reimagine what we conceptualize as valuable data. How do we do this? How do we provide researchers and funders with information about accountability and efficacy while still acknowledging the complexity of this medium? Well, first, to the researchers who are interested in applied theater, get yourself to a performance. You don't even need to be taking notes while you watch. Simply see shows, take classes, and expose yourself to this field that you find so fascinating. Your scientific credibility will not be compromised if you immerse yourself in this medium. If anything, it might be some of the most engaging naturalistic observation you ever do. Second, to the artists who are concerned about the research being done about your field, get yourself to a lab. Like I said before, contemporary theater makers are the recipients of traditions that stretch back thousands of years. As a result, it's our responsibility to get our scientific colleagues up to speed. If we can get artists and educators in the rooms where the studies about their field are being designed, if we can enlist them as collaborators and not just subjects, the subsequent data, whatever form it takes, will be that much stronger. Which brings me to my final suggestion. We need to reimagine and expand the way we measure value. This applies not only to labs and foundations, but to all of us who are the recipients and interpreters of this information. The scientific process has merit, but it is both naive and arrogant to assume that a piece of information is not meaningful simply because it does not fit cleanly into a coding schema. Humanity invented the scientific process, so it is humanity's responsibility to account for its shortcomings and ensure that it is genuinely providing the service that it claims to. Whether this means putting more stock in naturalistic observation or qualitative data or coming up with an entirely new means of reporting information, it is our duty, all of us, to ensure that the research being done is doing justice to its subjects. Because the reality is, I don't have any empirical data about my experience in girlhood. I can't tell you about the level of cortisol in my blood when I was on stage. Only that every hug I received after the show solidified my sense that I had just done something important. I can't chart for you the relationships between the women involved in the production. I can only tell you that years later, many of us still engaged in the rituals that we had developed during this process. I can't give you an ordinal rating for the extent to which I changed anyone's mind by sharing my story. I can only tell you that years later, productions like these have set me on a path that I wouldn't trade for anything. My lived experience has value, and I want to help the world understand it. And if doing so can provide other young people with access to the opportunities that I had, then I believe that is a worthwhile undertaking. I hope you'll join me. Thank you.